It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway, a chance for 16-year-old Emily and her father, David, to bond with his fiancée, Sarah, at their remote lake house. But when a thunderstorm rolled in and knocked out the power, they were plunged into darkness, isolated from the outside world. It wasn't until they heard the sound of breaking glass that they realized they were not alone. Four men, dressed in prison jumpsuits, had broken into the house, seeking refuge from the storm. They were escaped convicts, dangerous and desperate. Emily's heart raced as she saw the glint of a knife in one of the men's hands. She knew they had to act fast. She urged her father and Sarah to retreat to the upstairs bedroom while she stood guard at the top of the stairs, a baseball bat in hand. The convicts, who were armed with guns and makeshift weapons, searched the house, tearing apart furniture and ransacking drawers. Emily could hear their heavy footsteps and gruff voices as they moved from room to room, searching for valuables. She held her breath as one of the men climbed the stairs, inching closer to her. She tightened her grip on the bat, ready to defend herself and her family. But at the last moment, he turned around and went back downstairs. Emily knew they were running out of time. She needed to find a way to call for help, but the storm had knocked out the phone lines, and their cell phones were out of range. They were completely cut off from the outside world. As the night wore on, tensions rose between the convicts, each vying for control. Emily could hear them arguing and shouting, their voices echoing through the empty house. She knew that the situation was becoming increasingly dangerous, and they needed to find a way out before it was too late. The rain pounded against the windows, and the wind howled outside, making it impossible to hear anything else. Emily strained her ears, hoping to hear the sound of approaching sirens, but all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. She knew that the next few hours would be crucial. They needed to stay alive, to survive until help arrived. But as the night wore on, it became clear that their attackers were not going to give up easily. Emily took a deep breath, her hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. She knew that they had to fight to defend themselves, to protect their home and each other. They had to be strong, to hold on to hope, even in the face of overwhelming danger. Emily could hear the convicts moving around the house, their footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors. She tightened her grip on the baseball bat, her knuckles turning white. She knew that she needed to stay alert, to be ready for anything. As she stood guard at the top of the stairs, she could feel the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She was the only thing standing between her family and the dangerous men who had invaded their home. The night dragged on, and Emily's nerves were on edge. She could hear the men whispering to each other, plotting their next move. She knew that they were waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, she heard a loud crash, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Her heart raced as she realized that the convicts were trying to break into the upstairs bedroom. Emily sprang into action, racing down the stairs and into the living room. She could see the shadowy figures of the men outside, their faces obscured by the darkness. She raised the baseball bat high above her head, ready to strike. But as she swung, one of the men grabbed her by the arm, wrenching the bat from her grip. Emily fought back, kicking and punching with all her might. But the man was too strong, and he easily overpowered her. He threw her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back. Emily struggled to break free, her heart racing with fear. She knew that she needed to keep fighting, to hold on to the hope that they would survive. As the night wore on, Emily and her family became increasingly isolated. They were cut off from the outside world, unable to call for help or escape. They were trapped at the mercy of the convicts. But Emily refused to give up. She knew that they had to keep fighting, to stay alive until help arrived. She rallied her father and Sarah, urging them to stay strong, to keep their spirits up. Together, they barricaded themselves in the bedroom, piling furniture against the door. They huddled together, listening to the sound of the rain and the wind outside. But as the hours passed, the situation became increasingly dire. The convicts were getting more aggressive, more violent. They were running out of food and water, and they were all exhausted and scared. Emily knew that they needed to find a way out, to escape before it was too late. She racked her brain, trying to think of a way to call for help or signal for help. Then, she remembered the flare gun that her father kept in the closet. She crawled across the room, digging through the clutter until she found it. Emily loaded the flare gun, her hands shaking with nerves. She raised it to the window, aiming at the sky. She pulled the trigger, and a bright red light shot into the air. It was a long shot, but Emily hoped that someone would see the signal, that someone would come to their rescue. She prayed that they would survive the night, that they would make it out alive. As the morning sun began to rise, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe the flare gun had worked, maybe someone had seen it and was on their way to help. But as the day wore on, Emily realized that they were still alone. The convicts showed no sign of leaving, and their situation was growing more desperate by the minute. Emily's father and Sarah were both exhausted and frightened. They had been up all night, listening to the convicts moving around the house. Emily knew that they needed to keep their spirits up, to keep fighting. But as the hours passed, it became increasingly clear that they were running out of options. They had no food or water left, and they were all dehydrated and hungry. Emily's father made a desperate decision. He told Sarah and Emily that he was going to try to negotiate with the convicts, to see if he could get them to leave peacefully. Emily was terrified. She knew that negotiating with dangerous criminals was a recipe for disaster. But her father was determined, and she couldn't dissuade him. As he made his way down the stairs, Emily and Sarah huddled together, waiting for him to return. But he never did. Instead, they heard shouting and cursing, followed by the sound of a gunshot. Emily's heart raced as she realized that her father was in trouble. She grabbed the baseball bat and rushed down the stairs, ready to defend her family. But when she got to the bottom, she saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the convicts was holding her father at gunpoint, his other hand wrapped around Sarah's throat. Emily froze, unsure of what to do. The convict grinned at her, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little family reunion," he said. Emily's heart sank as she realized that they had been betrayed. Her father had tried to negotiate with the convicts, and it had only made things worse. The convict with the gun pushed her father to the ground, and Emily rushed to his side. Sarah was gasping for air, tears streaming down her face. The situation was hopeless. They were outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in their own home with no way out. Emily felt a surge of anger and frustration. Why had this happened to them? Why were they being targeted by these dangerous men? As the night wore on, Emily and her family huddled together, waiting for the worst. They were terrified, but they refused to give up hope. They clung to each other, determined to survive no matter what. But as the hours passed, their situation grew more desperate. They were running out of time and resources, and the convicts showed no sign of leaving. Emily knew that they needed a miracle to make it out alive. Emily couldn't sleep. She sat up, her back against the wall, and kept watch. The convicts were still in the house, but they were quiet now. Emily wondered what they were planning. She heard a creaking sound, like a floorboard being stepped on. Emily tensed, her grip tightening on the baseball bat. She hoped that it was just her imagination, but then she heard another sound, a low growl. Suddenly, a hand shot out of the darkness and grabbed her by the hair. Emily screamed and swung the bat blindly, hitting the convict in the face. The convict stumbled back, cursing and clutching his bleeding nose. Emily jumped up and ran towards the kitchen, hoping to find something to defend herself with. But before she could get there, she felt someone grab her from behind. She struggled and kicked, but the convict was too strong. He wrestled her to the ground, pinning her arms behind her back. Emily's heart raced as she saw the other convicts approaching. They were armed with knives and guns, and they looked determined to finish the job. Sarah and Emily's father rushed to her side, but they were quickly overpowered. The convicts tied them up and forced them to sit on the living room floor. Emily felt a surge of anger and frustration. She couldn't believe that this was happening to her family. They had done nothing wrong, and yet they were being targeted by these dangerous criminals. But despite her fear, Emily refused to give up. She knew that they had to fight back, to make a stand and defend themselves. As the convicts approached, Emily thought quickly. She remembered the lighter and the hairspray in her backpack. She had seen a movie where a girl used a similar combination as a makeshift flamethrower. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out the lighter and hairspray. She aimed the nozzle at the convicts and pressed the button. A jet of flame shot out, engulfing the convicts in a wall of fire. They screamed and stumbled backwards, trying to put out the flames. Emily and her family used the distraction to free themselves and grab weapons. They fought back with everything they had, swinging the baseball bat and using chairs and kitchen utensils as weapons. The convicts were caught off guard, and Emily's family managed to overpower them. The fight was brutal and bloody, but in the end, Emily and her family emerged victorious. As the sun rose on a new day, Emily and her family sat outside, battered and bruised but alive. They hugged each other tightly, grateful to be alive. The nightmare was finally over. Emily had proven to herself that she was stronger and braver than she ever thought possible. She had faced her fears and emerged victorious, and she knew that she would never forget this experience. Days had passed since the convicts invaded their home. The police had come and gone, and Emily's family had given their statements about what had happened. Emily had struggled to sleep and eat, haunted by the memories of what had occurred. Her father and Sarah had both suffered injuries during the attack, and they were still recovering. Emily had also been hurt, but she tried to keep it to herself, not wanting to add to her family's worries. But despite the physical injuries, it was the emotional scars that were the hardest to heal. Emily couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability and fear that had taken hold of her during the attack. She wondered if she would ever feel safe again. Her father noticed her struggle and suggested they take a family vacation to help them all recover. He suggested a cabin in the mountains, where they could disconnect from the world and spend time together as a family. At first, Emily was hesitant. She wasn't sure she was ready to leave the safety of her own home. But as she thought about it more, she realized that it might be exactly what they all needed. The cabin was remote, with no neighbors nearby. It was surrounded by trees and wildlife, and the fresh air felt good in Emily's lungs. The sound of the rushing river and the rustling leaves provided a calming backdrop. Slowly but surely, Emily began to relax. She and her family went on hikes, built fires, and played board games. Emily even found herself smiling and laughing again, something she hadn't done in a long time. But despite the fun they were having, Emily couldn't completely forget what had happened. Every time she heard a noise or saw a shadow, her heart raced. She couldn't help but think about what might be lurking in the darkness. One night, as they sat around the fire roasting marshmallows, Emily finally opened up to her father and Sarah. She told them about her fear and anxiety, and how she couldn't seem to shake it. Her father and Sarah listened patiently, their faces full of empathy. They told Emily that it was okay to be scared, that what had happened to them was traumatic and it would take time to heal. But they also reminded her of how strong she had been during the attack, how she had fought back and saved their lives. They told her that she was brave and resilient, and that she had nothing to be ashamed of. For the first time since the attack, Emily felt like she was making progress. She realized that it was okay to be scared, but that it was important to keep moving forward. As their vacation came to an end, Emily felt a sense of renewal. She knew that the memories of the attack would always be with her, but she also knew that she was stronger than her fear. She had survived one of the most terrifying experiences of her life, and she knew that she could face anything that came her way. As they packed up their belongings and headed back to their car, Emily felt a newfound sense of hope. She knew that life would never be the same, but she also knew that she was capable of overcoming any obstacle that came her way. The car ride home from their vacation was a quiet one. Emily's father and Sarah were both lost in thought, and Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of apprehension. She knew that going back home would be a challenge. She didn't know how she would be able to face the place where the attack had taken place. As they pulled up to their driveway, Emily's heart rate increased. She tried to take deep breaths to calm herself down, but it didn't seem to work. Her father and Sarah both noticed her distress and tried to reassure her that everything would be okay. As they entered the house, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions. The memories of the attack were still fresh in her mind, but she also felt a sense of relief to be back in her own space. Her father and Sarah had taken steps to make the house feel safer. They had installed new locks on all the doors and windows and had put up an alarm system. Emily appreciated their efforts, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. The first few days back home were tough. Emily struggled to sleep and eat, haunted by the memories of the attack. She found herself jumping at every noise and feeling on edge all the time. But slowly but surely, she began to settle back into her routine. She started going back to school and hanging out with her friends. Her father and Sarah also made an effort to spend more time with her, taking her out for dinner and movie nights. One day, Emily's father suggested they go back to the lake house for a visit. Emily was hesitant at first, but she realized that it might help her face her fears. She agreed to go, and they made plans to spend a weekend there. As they arrived at the cabin, Emily felt a sense of nostalgia. The memories of their family vacation flooded back to her, but so did the memories of the attack. She took a deep breath and tried to focus on the positive. Over the course of the weekend, Emily felt herself relaxing more and more. She went on hikes, swam in the lake, and even tried fishing for the first time. She realized that the cabin wasn't just a place of trauma, but also a place of joy and happiness. As they packed up to leave, Emily felt a sense of closure. She realized that she would never forget what had happened, but that she could also move on from it. She knew that the attack had changed her, but she also knew that it had made her stronger. When they arrived back home, Emily felt a newfound sense of confidence. She knew that she could face anything that came her way, and that she had a support system in her family and friends. Over time, Emily's fear and anxiety began to fade. She still had moments of panic and worry, but they were fewer and farther between. She realized that she had the power to control her own thoughts and emotions, and that she didn't have to let fear control her. The attack had been a traumatic experience, but it had also taught Emily valuable lessons. She had learned to appreciate the moments of joy in life, to cherish the people she loved, and to be resilient in the face of adversity. As she looked back on the experience, Emily realized that she was no longer a troubled teenager, but a survivor. She was proud of how far she had come, and she knew that she could face anything that life threw her way.